It's around about that time of the year when I feel the urge to replay Final Fantasy Tactics. The first time I saw Final Fantasy Tactics was probably back around 1999. I was visiting my stepmother's family, and her brother had just bought a couple of new games and asked me if I wanted to check them out. He popped in the disc for FFT and started up a new game. After the game went on about how history is written by the victors of war, it asked him for his name and birthday. And then it started. Little sprites marched in time, waiting for their turn so they could go and beat up other little sprites. I still remember the first thing he said, "Man, they look like little children." Then he turned it off and put in Resident Evil 2, and he also let me take a disc home that afternoon. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of those games I come back to every once in a while, like several of the games in the series, but it's definitely one that's different every single time. This is mostly due to the intricate battle system that is simple enough to work with, but rewarding for those who dive in and fiddle around with it. And it was definitely different this time around because I played the War of the Lions remake that was made for the PSP. Battles are played out on a 3D isometric grid, where units are placed and wait for their orders according to a charge time meter, which fills up depending on their speed. You can affect the flow of turns by using different techniques, so it's not really super turn-based, and placement of units is important to avoid being pummeled to death by enemies, since they do more damage if they attack you from the side or behind. That's only half of the game though. The other half is in the setup of your units. Like a lot of tactics games, FFT has a class-based system, where each class specializes in different areas. Wizards are long-range magic users, priests heal and buff units, and knights are close-range fighters who can destroy enemy equipment. Each character, though, can change jobs between battle depending on what they have unlocked. War of the Lions introduces 2 new classes, as well as 2 new hero or special units. The 2 new classes, Dark and Onion Knight, I didn't really get to play around with much, as they are very much a grind to get. The 2 new heroes, Luso from Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2, which is a mouthful, and Balthier from FF12, aren't super overpowered, but I did tend to abuse them, as they can get quite powerful. Here's where it gets interesting though. Skills that a unit learns can still be used provided that you assign them beforehand. What this means basically is that you can turn a knight into a wizard, and still have access to the skills he had as a knight. You wouldn't actually want to do that, but it's in trying out different combinations that you make the best units. One particular example that I tend to go back to every single time is, take my hero, for example, Ramza. He was a squire for his base class, with battle skill as his secondary, but he also had 2 swords from the ninja class as his support ability, which meant that when he countered, which is a reaction ability from the monk class, he would hit 2 times. Yes, I can already see your eyes glazing over. Let's move on to something else. What about the narrative, I hear you ask? Final Fantasy Tactics is set in Ivalice, the setting for a couple of Final Fantasies, in a time known as the Lion War. The main story takes place seemingly in the background of this huge medieval war, with various plots, backstabs, and some demonic influences. I will admit, a lot of it went over my head the first time I played through. I was, 10 or 12, 11? But now that I'm kind of older, it kind of reminds me of like a really good fantasy book, like Game of Thrones, in terms of political complexity. You play as Ramza, who grows through the story from a young idealistic cadet to a hero of the war, but is remembered in history as a heretic and a traitor. Through the game you learn how this happens, and of course that history is written by those who win. Or at least backstab enough people so that no one is alive to know you're a bad guy. There are a lot of characters in FFT, but enough memorable ones to keep you interested. Ramza, of course, is a solid piece of character development, but there's also his best friend Delita, who kind of takes the ends justifying the means route. Even during my 3rd playthrough though, this would be my 4th now, there were a couple of times where I had to look up who someone was. War of the Lions doesn't really change much in terms of the graphics, so there are still some very basic 3D battle grids and sprites, but the spell effects still look good. I'm gonna be honest though, I partly look at this game through rose-colored glasses. It was the first video game I actually started copying artwork from. I could do the first 4 battles blindfolded, because for one entire long weekend, it was all my friend Ryan and I would play, because we didn't have a memory card, and the 4th battle is a fucking bitch to finish. But it's also so very, very solid. I seem to learn something new about it every time I play through, like that lightning spells become more powerful in the rain, or that when you choose a healer, you have to make sure that the zodiac sign is compatible with your other units so that they can heal them effectively. So there is a reason that it's attained cult classic status, and also why when they remade it, they didn't just port it over, they added in those 2 new classes, 2 new heroes, a lot of little secret scenes here and there, and some really nice cel-shaded cutscenes with voiceovers. I got to hear Ramza and Delita for the first time, and it wasn't too bad. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but Final Fantasy Tactics definitely deserves its place in the series, and it's earned it in the blood of 100 slain enemies and spells rained down from the heavens.